Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining our question and answer panel session for the 2024 Seeding Solutions program. We will wait just a minute to give a few folks a little bit more time to join. Okay, I see our numbers are stabilizing around 32, and that's about right with the registration list. So we'll jump right in. Most of today's time is really for you to ask us questions. But first, I'd really like to have to thank our team, who has really been a big part of administering the Seeding Solutions program. Very happy that Olivia Shoemaker can join us. She's on the project management team. Marina Middleton is also with us. She's from the grants management team and our resident expert on matching questions. And then I also want to acknowledge Ryan Camella, who leads the program management. He's not able to join us, but if any of you have specific questions, you've likely connected with Ryan, and I know he's on standby to continue that support. So we'll just briefly review a bit about FAR and our research themes as it's relevant to the Seeding Solutions program. The Seeding Solutions program is our annual flagship program that really aspires to support research that proposes innovative solutions or new ways to tackle the challenges related to food supply and agricultural sustainability. We'll dive into a little bit more specific information about the Seeding Solutions program, and then we'll again spend most of the time opening the floor for your questions. Okay, so about FAR, we were established in 2014 by the Farm Bill. We work to build public-private partnerships that connect funders, research, and farmers to pioneer the next frontier of agricultural innovation. What's unique and I think exciting about our work is that we work very hard to ensure our investments complement and do not duplicate the USDA's research agenda. So very excited to work with ARS and other research scientists throughout all of our efforts. We work very hard to identify and fill critical knowledge gaps, limiting our capacity to tackle those challenges, those global challenges. We increase public agricultural research investments, focus on applied actionable science. That means involving farmers to solve the current solutions, and a commitment to moving research from the lab to the field. We work across 4 broad priority areas. They include sustaining vibrant agroecosystems, cultivating thriving production systems, bolstering healthy food systems, and strengthening the scientific workforce. Within each of those priority areas, we have developed key themes and priorities. So in the vibrant agroecosystems theme area, we are very interested in research that supports pathways to adoption, develops capacity to inform agroecosystem decisions, and catalyzes sustainable solutions. In the thriving production systems, which focuses on advanced animal systems and next generation crops, we prioritize research that enhances crop resilience and productivity, integrates animal health, welfare, and productivity, supports the economic development of our agroecosystems, and upholds our commitment to environmental sustainability. In the healthy food systems, we support research that enables us to optimize health and nutrition through our agricultural systems, supports food manufacturing and processing to meet our global sustainability objectives, ensures economic viability in a bioeconomy, and addresses concerns related to environmental contaminants and pollutants. And then our newest pillar focuses on a strong scientific workforce This includes expanding the talent pool, attracting new talent, and retaining existing talent. So with that background, I'd like to hand it off to Olivia, who's going to dive in a little bit deeper with the seating solutions. Olivia, ready?
Great. Thanks so much, Kathy. And thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today in this webinar. So just very briefly, I'm going to go over a few slides to give some background before we dive into our Q&A portion of this webinar. And first and foremost is just to assure you all that you are in the right place. This is for the Seating Solutions program. It is the program for which you all have been invited to submit your full proposals. And it is our annual grant program that funds audacious research supporting each of our research priority areas, which Kathy just went over. And through this program, what our goal is to fund is pioneering science, which convenes unique partners from across the food and agriculture sector to solve bold challenges. Just a quick overview of our timeline here. And the most important date on this timeline is in a few weeks, just under 3 weeks, Wednesday, July 31st, by the end of the day. That will be the deadline to submit your full proposals. And unfortunately, we do not offer extensions, so please be aware of that date. And really, that date allows us to spend the next few months completing our external peer review process so that we can hope to make our award decisions by early December of this year. And just quickly here, an overview of our review criteria. Now, I do want to say that all of this information can and should be accessed in the RFA, which is much more complete than this. This is just an overview and a reminder that we do share the sorts of criteria that your full proposals will be evaluated upon. And we have 4 major themes, and those are novelty, innovation, and originality, technical merit and feasibility, impacts and outcomes, and partnerships. But again, just under each of those, a few examples and definitions of what each of those mean to us and will mean to our reviewers, but more complete information in the RFA. And so now I'm happy to move us into our Q&A portion of the session. And we did receive a few written inquiries ahead of time that we will field now. And why we do this, just want to repeat, please do utilize that Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. I see already we have a few questions, and so we will be answering those in our open format. But before we get to that point, I would like to field some of our questions and welcome Marina Middleton, our in-house grant specialist, to kick us off with our first section on budget. And the first question will be, is personnel salary considered as cash match?
Thanks, Olivia. I appreciate the intro. So right off the bat, personnel salary is considered a cash match, as are any wages. Anytime professional time is compensated by wages or salary, we consider it cash, even if it is not paid by or to the awardee institution. If you have any like case-by-case questions about like, oh, I've got a funky personnel situation, feel free to email the grants inbox at grants@foundation-FAR. We can help you figure out, where the line is between match that's cash or in kind. And then Olivia, is it okay if I just jump right into questions 2, 3, and 4?
Please do.
Awesome. So question 2, can cash match stay within the co-PI Institute itself, or does it need to be distributed to the lead PI Institute? The answer is it can stay with the co-PI institution. We consider cash match to be cash regardless of who spends it and where, as long as we can verify that it happened and that money changed bank accounts. The lead institution is still responsible for certifying that that match was spent. So there needs to be trust between the lead institution and the co-PI institution. Number 3, must matching funds and FAR grant funding be spent concurrently? It doesn't need to be spent dollar to dollar concurrently. You do not need to have, every time you spend one FAR dollar, you must also find a way to spend one match dollar. But when you present your project budget, we should see comparable amounts being spent in FAR amount and match amounts. If you have an active award and you tell us that you spent all of the FAR money but none of the match for a given year, we're going to have a lot of questions. about why our money got used and not the matching funds. So it doesn't need to be an exact one-to-one in terms of spending per year, but we do expect to see kind of a comparable spend. And then number 4, does there need to be a written budget narrative for each year the project is anticipated to take place? The budget narrative covers goals and milestones and objectives within the project. So while it will describe the project from the start to the end, it should be focused more on explaining why the spending is needed for a specific outcome or goal or milestone to occur. So the answer is yes, but the focus should be on making sure that it's structured around the programmatic side of things. I saw a question in our Q&A box also about the budget justification and budget narrative. We will get to that after we've done our written inquiries, so we can have some more detailed discussion of the budget narrative versus budget justification once we get through these other questions.
Thanks so much, Marina.
And then
Kathy.
Kathy's got more to say.
Yep. So just to touch back also on the timeline, want to highlight that these full applications go through a 3-tier review process. So in the first stage, your proposals will be shared with external peer reviewers, much like a manuscript is reviewed. In the second stage, the proposals and the technical reviews are considered by our scientific advisory committees, who will also assess how well the proposals align with our portfolios within each of our priority areas. And then that third stage is an internal evaluation to ensure that the proposals align with FAR's priorities as a whole. In the external peer reviews, the peer reviewers will be looking at the budget, mainly at the budget narrative, not your budget worksheet, to evaluate how well the budget aligns with your work plan. They'll be looking to see, do you have realistic expectations of the cost of that research, the length of time that research takes, and also kind of the feasibility based on that budget. So think of the budget as kind of reinforcing your work plan and giving credibility to your work plan as far as your experience and knowledge of how to carry out that work plan. Whereas the budget is spreadsheet breaks that down even further into a year-by-year basis. So I hope that adds clarification to the difference between those two.
Thanks, Kathy. And we have some great questions already in the Q&A. Many of them are about the budget. So once we wrap up the written inquiries in our open format, I will be sure that those make it to the floor. Before we do that, I'd just like to cover the rest of our other section questions that we received. And also, Marina, we would love to hear your expertise on this first question. So, do projects related to meat processing and packers need to respond to the organizational assurances?
So the short answer is yes. The questions in the organizational assurances section of the application are, does your project involve human subjects? Does your project involve recombinant DNA? Does your project involve animals? So those questions everybody should answer. Often the answer will be no, and that is totally okay. In cases like this one, where meat processing and packers are going to say, yes, it involves animal subjects, the follow-up question will be about whether or not the project is exempt from IACUC oversight. For those of you who work with animals, I'm sure you're very familiar with IACUC, but just briefly, anyone working with humans subject to IRB and anyone working with animals subject to IACUC first must evaluate their projects to see if they are exempt from those oversight bodies. Certain kinds of projects or certain kinds of interactions don't require the same level of ethical oversight. For commercial projects, like meat processing plants and packers, generally IACUC does not get involved with commercial endeavors, even in the research space. So double check your IACUC oversight. If you have questions or you're not sure, I encourage you to reach out to the grants@foundationfar.org email address. And if you have any academic partners involved in your project, they are probably the most knowledgeable about IACUC's ins and outs because it is a very complicated set of guidelines.
Thanks, Marina. And the remaining 3 questions here, I think we can do a little bit of a rapid fire through. I do just want to add some context for question 3. So in the chat, we have the same question. What is the page limit for biosketches? And on that, what is your advice if the list of collaborators or co-authors takes you over the page limit?
Should I answer the second question first?
Sure.
Okay. Current and pending support documents are required as part of the application. You will be prompted to provide them as part of filling out the online application form. The page limit for biosketches is 5 pages per biosketch. So the quick answer to that follow-up question in the Q&A is if you have a lot of key personnel and the document you're creating is longer than 5 pages, that's fine. It's 5 pages per person. Please do merge them all into one document when you upload it so that it is, biosketches and it can be, 20 pages, but it's still all the biosketches in one place. And then the final question, can we change the PI or co-PIs for our proposal? This is change from pre-proposal to full proposal. So they applied with one PI and now they are looking to move forward with a different principal investigator. The short answer is yes, as long as the concept stays the same. At this stage, you can change the personnel involved in the project. Please do be careful. The PI is the one who submitted, or the PI is usually the one who submitted the application via BBGM, which means if you are changing your PI, you may run into access issues as the original person who created and completed the application is no longer working on it or no longer considered the person eligible to submit. If you have any trouble accessing BBGM, or if you need to transfer something from one of your personnel to another, please reach out to grants@foundationfar.org and we can help make sure your team has access to all the pieces of the website you need.
Great. Thanks so much. And we just have a guess asking if the current pending document requirement was removed from the RFA and that they're not seeing it, but it should be a part of the application form that they'll need to use. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It is, you will be prompted to complete it. There was an error on the RFA that's on the website, and by the end of the day, it will be fixed.
Thanks so much. And just real quickly before we move on, we had a clarifying question. Go ahead.
I see a clarification about the per person limit of the list of collaborators. Was that what you were going to say as well?
You read my mind.
I'm sorry. So we got a clarification that the question was actually about whether the per person limit of collaborators and co-authors is over the 5-page limit. In that case, if someone has a biosketch that is longer than 5 pages long, I recommend, Shelby, I see your question. I'll repeat my answer as soon as I'm done with this one. In the case where a biosketch for an individual is longer than 5 pages, I recommend focusing on the projects that have taken the most of their professional time or have the most relevance to the project that is currently being proposed. If you're wondering about, case by case judgment calls, I would recommend working with that key personnel or PI to figure out what is most closely aligned with the work being proposed so that we can see their expertise in that space. Because that's really what the biosketch helps us see. Although, Kathy, I invite you to tell me if there's other things we need to make sure that they include. You're muted.
If your team exceeds the number of prompts for additional co-PIs, we encourage you to reach out to us in regards to the need. You might not need to list every person who's working on the project. So let's touch base on that if we need more information.
And then I wanted to make sure that I fulfilled my promise. So repeating the answer to the budget question number 3, must matching funds and FAR grant funding be spent concurrently? The answer is we expect to see comparable levels of spending, but we do not enforce a spend $1 here, spend $1 here level of concurrent spending. The project itself must have that 1-to-1 FAR to match funds ratio. But if more match happens in a certain year and more FAR funds happen in a different year, that's perfectly acceptable.
Marina, maybe you could share a little bit about the annual review process and how we go about looking at the progress and the budget's expenditures.
Sure.
Provide more context for that response.
Sure. So when a project is active and running, we collect annual reports that cover the scientific progress and the financial status. The financial status compares the original project that was approved to the spending that actually occurred. And we check and see if, for example, if we saw someone spending all of the FAR money and none of the match, we would have a lot of follow-up questions about why there wasn't support from external partners the way that we were expecting. If we see someone spending all of the match and none of the FAR money, we might have questions about why we're sending money instead of having you supported by someone else. So we're just looking, we're looking for a comparable level, and we understand that in different years, different levels of support from your external partners might be available. So it's okay if it's a little uneven from year to year, as long as it balances out over the life of the project.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Marina.
I'm seeing lots of action.
Yes, we have lots of action, and so I do want to move us on to the open format because I think we have plenty of content to fill that space. But before I do that, I had one more clarifying question on the bottom here about collaborators. And the question is it okay to leave off collaborators if it will make the bio sketch go over 5 pages? And I just want to reiterate that that 5-page limit is per personnel. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. And again, like Kathy said, if you find yourself running out of space to list all of your collaborators, please just reach out to us. And we did have a question in the chat as well. Please do use the Q&A function just so we make sure that we get to you. And one of these questions is, in the review process, will FAR reach out with additional questions? And the answer to that is it is rare, but we do sometimes ask clarifying questions. Okay. So let us wrap up the written inquiries phase, and I will try to organize these questions into something coherent so that we can tell a story that is understandable and clear. And just starting from the top, I see many of our questions are about project budget, and we'll try to group those together. And our first question is regarding the project budget. Is there a competitive advantage to providing a higher cost share, especially around personnel? Or is there any disadvantage to an overall higher total project cost grant request? Marina or Kathy?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab, Marina. So we do not give, a proposal will not receive a higher ranking because it has a higher match. Our proposal need only meet that 1-to-1 match criteria. However, FAR does highly value proposals that exceed that 1-to-1 match. It is part of our metrics, in terms of showing our value to Congress and refunding FAR. But again, your proposal will not be evaluated on that match ratio. We're not only looking at the funding contributed, we're looking at the partners and how they're participating in the project. So we're very committed to partner engaged research. That can be either through funding the research or actively participating in all the research phases. And our reviewers will be looking to see how the partners are taking part of that research project. One where the participants are more fully engaged could have a higher ranking than a proposal that's just being funded externally.
Thank you, Kathy. And the next two questions are a bit more technical, so Marina, I'm going to direct them to you. And they're about project budget narrative and justification. So the first question is, can you clarify the difference? Are these two distinct responses? And if so, what should each address? What should each address and include? And pretty much a similar question is that, are the budget narrative and justification two separate documents to submit, and how do they differ? So a little more explanation on those two items.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tag Kathy in as well for an explanation of what we're looking for in each of those. But at the very basic level, budget justification and budget narrative are two separate fields that you will be prompted to give two separate answers to as you fill out the online application. A budget narrative has instructions included under the header, and the instructions lay out what we're expecting to see. But in brief, we're looking for a narrative, a story about the money being spent under each objective, goal, milestone, that explains what kind of spending we can see commensurate with what kind of scientific activities we can see. So if one of your goals, for example, is breed a new kind of potato, we would expect to see the steps that go into breeding that new kind of potato with the commensurate amount of funds being distributed to that step. So we think that that step will take $1 million. And here's why. The budget justification is a year-by-year annual breakdown of why you're charging certain money to certain years. So they should describe the same sum of money, but it's organized in two different ways. The budget justification is what we use when a project is up and running. When you tell us in the budget justification, in year one, we're asking for $10,000 for personnel and $8,000 for materials and supplies. And here's the personnel we're going to use, and here's the materials and supplies we're going to buy. That's what goes into a budget justification. And after the first year of your project, that's what we would look at to say, like, well, they didn't buy all the materials that they said they were going to, but we see that they're making progress. So one is a more holistic kind of explanation of the science as a whole, and one is more of a timeline, kind of like piece by piece. Here is our step-by-step plan and why we're spending money here. Kathy, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, Marina, I think you nailed it. Maybe a good way to think about it is the project narrative is mostly for your colleagues, peers who are going to review the proposal from a technical and feasibility perspective. And part of that feasibility perspective will be evaluating how well the budget reflects the expected work plan and your understanding of the work needed to carry out that work plan. Whereas the budget justification is really for the grant's kind of financial management perspective.
Great. Thank you, Kathy and Marina. And we have a question here about match, so similar to budget, but before we get to that step, and Kathy, I think I'm going to direct this one towards you. Does a match have to be confirmed to receive the award? And what support can FAR provide to find a matching funds, if awarded without a committed match?
I apologize. I think I need
yeah,
to jump in.
Okay.
These are policy level questions about FAR's matching funds policy. We will not give an award if match is not confirmed. So that is the beginning of that. FAR is not in a position to provide one-on-one support or matchmaking opportunities when it comes to finding matching funders. We do our level best to provide everyone with the support that we can, but in order to be fair to all of our many applicants, we can't serve as matchmakers per se. If there are professional networks we can leverage, we try and do the best we can, but we make no guarantees, and we definitely have no structures in place to help find matching funders for applicants, as much as it is something that we would love to do. And then I believe there was a third thing. Let's see, what's work and match FAR provide? Yeah, so match does need to be confirmed when we receive the award, but at the stage that you are in right now, all we need is a match verification letter. So the way that we confirm match, it goes in 3 steps. The first is that you just provide a letter from the matching funder saying, we know this application is happening, and we expect to support it at this level if it gets funded. That letter is non-binding. It is meant to be not intimidating to external funders. That's our hope. Those are due when you submit your full proposal. You'll see them as match verification letters, and you'll be prompted to upload them as part of finishing your proposal online. If you are selected for funding, we will contact you and we will work with you to get an actual binding match commitment document called an attachment C and match, what is it called? Match verification, matching details form. I've been working here 7 years and I still can't remember the names of all the different forms. So that binding letter that we will work with you to get once you are selected for funding, that will be confirmation that the match exists at the beginning of the project. If the project gets funded, is up and running, we will then check in every 12 months with the awardee institution, with you, and ask, you said that you were going to give, you said that you were going to receive this much match from this much, from this institution. Is that still happening? And then you can tell us, yes, it's still happening, or no, we've had some changes. And that is sort of our last level of kind of check-in. That was a lot of information for a pretty short question, so please let me know if you have clarifying questions.
Yeah, and Marina, I'll just add on a little bit. So first, know that FAR is very sensitive to the challenge of aligning match with the RFA process, that private partners often expect much tighter timeframes than the 9 to 12 months it can take to go through the RFA process. And then, as Marina was laying out, through that grant agreement phase, where you go from award to actually dispersing the research funds. It's that grant agreement phase where we need to certify the match. The other comment is to know that we cannot promise to connect you with partners, but please, if you'd like to reach out to the program director, the scientific program director who's most relevant to your research project, if we can and it fits well with the work we're doing, we're very happy to make connections and support your efforts in any way possible. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thanks so much. And just want to shout out that we have a compliment in the chat that was a great description of match process and very well articulated, Marina. So thank you so much for all of the clarifying you do for all of us throughout this whole process. And I just want to take a second to remind everybody that this is being recorded, and we will also be generating a sort of Q&A FAQ transcript to be shared publicly after this webinar. So please do be on the lookout for that, and in case you want to go back and reference. And also just to call out that if you would like, you can also raise your hand and to ask a live question, and we'll do our best to monitor that as well. We have a few questions in here about following up on organizational assurances. So one question is just maybe a brief description of it. And the question is, which unit is it usually at university? And then we have another more specific question about it that I think might be better discussed offline. It seems pretty project specific, so please do reach out to us about that. But Marina, on that first question, do you just want to give a brief overview of the process of identifying organizational assurances?
Yeah, absolutely. So organizational assurances is an umbrella term that we use to talk about any time that a scientific project might involve aspects that require additional ethical oversight. So we ask whether or not your project has certain things involved with it. Human subjects is the biggest one. For obvious reasons, we want to know that people are behaving ethically if they are working with humans. Animal subjects is the next biggest one. We also ask if it requires a NEPA review, which is any project that is likely to have a long-term widespread impact on the ecology of an area. The answer to that is almost always no. The EPA will absolutely have told you by now if your process requires oversight from them. The other thing we ask about is recombinant DNA, because there have been some ethical concerns around that. And I believe we also ask about hazardous materials, which means anything from persistent biohazards all the way up to radioactive materials. Again, deeply unlikely considering the kind of work that we fund on a regular basis, but you never know, something might come up. So first we ask whether any of these are involved with your project. If your answer to all of those is no, that's great, you're done. If your answer to any of those is yes, we will have follow-up questions. Typically, the people who are answering the follow-up questions are working with IRB or IACUC because they have human or animal subjects. Those are the most common yes answers. So we ask if you are eligible for an exemption, which is basically you have had your IRB or IACUC boards look at your project description and confirm that the aspects of ethical oversight that they are responsible for don't apply to your project. Like we mentioned earlier, commercial animals are almost never subject to IACUC approval. An example of an exemption in the IRB space, if you are using answers to an existing survey that already happened, you don't actually need IRB overview for that, but you do need your IRB to confirm that you're exempt. So we'll ask questions about whether or not you got that confirmation, what date it was. At the time you submit your full proposal, we typically see, that these applications are pending. You're working with your IACUC, you're working with your IRB. If you already have confirmation from them, that's wonderful. It's not required to be done. It's just required that you have that process in mind. To answer the question about what unit of the academic institution, it varies by school. Typically, most veterinary colleges have an IACUC board, either associated with them or as part of the school itself. So if you have animal subjects, you're very likely to also have IACUC representatives accessible to you. And then most universities have a single IRB, which stands for Internal Review Board, by the way. That single IRB typically reviews all of the human subject research that an institution does. If you're not an academic institution and you don't know how to access an IRB or IACUC, and you think you will need one, reach out to grants@foundationfar.org, and we will work with you on a case-by-case basis to determine whether or not it's needed and how we can best get that ethical oversight.
Thanks so much, Marina, for another comprehensive answer. So we have actually see a raised hand. So I think for the sake of switching it up, I believe and it's been taken down. Very little stage fright or an accident there. So we'll stay in the Q&A box here. We do have more questions about the actual application components, but we also have a few about content and more programmatic questions. So I'm going to direct this next question to Kathy. And this question is, can you talk about how to handle an application that clearly addresses more than one of the 4 priority areas? And how should that be handled in the application?
Thanks, Olivia. So we have our overarching priority areas, and then within each we have our portfolio leads. Those include my colleagues who are overseeing work in advanced animal systems, next generation crops, soil health, our ag mission, sustainable water management, and bolstering healthy food systems. I think what I would recommend is the applicant think carefully about who they would like as the lead contact for their proposal, for your proposal. Let me further add that you will not be penalized if you should choose the wrong portfolio or even the wrong priority area, we collaborate very closely within FAR. If you are completely off, which is hard to imagine, we would surely recruit our colleagues to ensure that you are getting the right level of support and overview of your application, and that you have the best contact at FAR to advance your application through the process.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. And we do have a hand up. I believe it's Jorge, so I'm going to go ahead and bring you to the floor, ask you to unmute, and please share your
Yes.
question with us.
Yes, hi. So regarding the human subject that you were talking, so we are developing a non-allergenic wheat. So we will produce that wheat. That's the proposal. But we have lined up medical groups that will take those materials and test them outside of the project. Do I still need to say I have human subjects if I'm not being the person that will be doing any of the research with the human subjects?
I have a clarifying question.
Yeah.
Will the testing of the wheat be a part of the scope of the FAR-funded Seeding Solutions project?
Yes, it is. It's a healthy food is eliminating an allergen from the population. So probably it fits also in next generation crops. But we sent a inquiry to FFAR and we sent a letter of intent and they said yes, submit it. So
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds really cool.
yeah.
The clarifying question was mostly so I understood, so I could give you the correct answer. If the human subject testing is happening as part of the scope of the FAR-funded work, as the primary institution that receives the grant, the ethical oversight of all subawards, which is what those medical institutions would be to you as a subawardee.
No, nothing. There will be just external collaborators that at the end of the grant will receive the materials for testing.
So the testing is not happening during the scope of work?
It will be happening in intermediate steps. I will be sending samples to them, but I will not be responsible. So we are an agricultural institution, so I have zero experience with human boards and IRBs and things like that. So I'm terrified about having.
Yeah, I can tell it's very stressful, and I'm glad that you're here and asking. So, the actions of any partners or subawardees or contractors working on behalf of a project are the responsibility of the primary institution. The good news is, if you're working with a medical institution, they definitely have ethical oversight bodies built.
But they're not part of the grant. They are not co-PIs or key personnel of the grant.
That's totally okay. All we need to know is that they have
an IRB.
That they have an IRB or some other comparable ethical oversight.
Okay, so
if they're not an academic institution, they might.
Yeah, it's UC Davis Medical School, so they do have.
Excellent.
Okay,
then
so
they definitely have an IRB and they've got it handled. We just need to know.
But I need to document that. I need to say yes to then this project involves human subject, or I need to say no
because it does. And I'm happy to help you more offline. Okay. This sounds like a great opportunity for us to have a call and work more directly with you specifically. But the good news is you're working with professionals who absolutely have it covered. You just need to figure out what you need to tell us.
Okay.
Great. Thanks so much. Okay. So I'm going to follow up with one more programmatic question here for Kathy. And that is, can you share any details on historic funding rates for this program? For example, the percentage of full proposals funded.
Yep. Historically, we have invited about 50% of the pre-applications to move on to the full application stage. And of those full applications, we tend to fund 15 to 25% of the applications. Again, a lot depends. We aim to award approximately $10 million a year. We do look to distribute those funds across our priority areas, and we work very carefully to ensure those projects align with FAR's priorities.
Great. Thanks so much for that clarification. Most of our remaining questions here are about the application components, so I'm going to ask one. This could go either way, Marina or Kathy. And can you please clarify if the project description, which is mentioned as a required attachment, is indeed project justification and approach?
So I believe you're asking about, I'm sorry, Kathy, you started talking.
Go ahead, Marina. No, you're good.
I believe you're asking about the document that we require that is essentially the project description and justification over again. And what we're expecting is essentially a word for word reproduction of what we received in the text boxes earlier in the application. But this gives you the opportunity to integrate equations, graphs, visuals. The idea is that because the text boxes cannot support things like bold or italics, let alone things like graphs or pictures, we wanted to give you a space where you could give us the polished final version that you would circulate to your peers, not just the bare bones HTML.
Great.
And indeed, you want to include a justification and rationale, as well as an overview of your approach to tackling the highlighted challenge.
Great. And Jorge, I see that your hand is up. I believe it's a new question, and if it is, and if it's something that is broadly applicable, we welcome you to ask it here. So I will go ahead and ask you to unmute. But again, for everybody, the offer is definitely on the table with anything that is very project specific to please reach out to us, our grants team, our programmatic team, and we would be very happy to dive into all of the specifics with you. So I will unmute you now.
No, thank you. It was the same question. I have my questions in the Q&A, and we will wait for my turn. I already speak enough.
Okay. Okay. We have a question about USDA. So the USDA ask and required sections. Let's see, locations of performance and USDA involvement. The question is, do you consider USDA involvement a good thing?
Yeah, I can take this one, Olivia, and say yes, as much as we would value collaboration with experts from other institutions or even with your own institution. While our work as a whole, part of our priorities is to ensure that we are complementing and strengthening the USDA science investments. Proposals within Seeding Solutions will not receive a higher ranking because of a USDA collaboration.
Great, thank you. I'm seeing two more questions here in our Q&A about budget and match. And so the first one is, can the PI's host institution provide cash match? And does FAR rank a proposal higher if there are external partners providing some or most of the cash match to the project? Kathy?
Yep. So yes, university match is acceptable, and we have historically made awards to proposals that are funded through university resources. But your proposals that include contributions from external partners will rank higher than university-based matched proposals.
Thank you. And following up on that, Marina, I'll just direct this one to you. Is a matching funds contribution letter needed for funds that are provided internally?
Yes.
Wonderful. Great. And another question on the component here. So one of the required components is project funding overlap. Is that a separate document from the current and pending support document? And if so, what is the format for that document? Marina, if you want to take this one.
I absolutely can. I don't believe project funding overlap is a document that we're asking for. I believe it is simply a question asking for a text response. So project funding overlap is meant to capture any other times and places that you or significant members of your team are working with FAR. There are some familiar names that I'm not going to call out in this chat. So I know for a fact that we've had either previous awards with some of our current applicants or even have some active awards with some of our current applicants. The project funding overlap space is where we're hoping to capture, okay, Dr. Smith already has an award with FAR. It's not something that will damage your chances of being funded again, but it is something that is important to keep track of for us as an institution, just so that we know who we're funding and when. It's also important for us to check, for example, the New Innovator Awards are currently in the peer review stage. If you applied for a New Innovator Award earlier this year, that's something we would want to know, especially if you were selected for funding, because we would want to look at those two projects and make sure that they are different enough to be, you know, interesting scientifically. So that's kind of a long word, but basically like, it's just so that we know where else we're working with you.
Great. Thank you, Marina. We have about 9 minutes left on the clock and 3 questions remaining, so I think we're doing great on time, and we will be able to get to everything before we wrap up. But again, if we did not cover anything that pertains to your proposal or questions about the program, please do reach out to us via email. So our next question is, again, another component of the application question, and that is, can outreach be included as a component of the proposal? And how will it be evaluated compared to more research-focused projects? So Kathy or Marina, if this resonates with either one of you.
Yep. So it's valuable to know that FAR does not fund outreach or implementation or education types of projects. But if your project is exploring different outreach strategies, that outreach activity constitutes a fair expense of the project and can be included in the budget.
Thank you. This next question, I think I want to direct towards Marina, and that is, what is FAR's definition of the grants administrator role that you are requesting information about in the application?
I'm very glad you asked. The grant administrator is the person that we contact in addition to the PI when we are asking questions about the grantee institution's indirect costs, needs, about sub-award relationships, about any kind of logistical, especially budgetary aspects. Once a project is funded and active, the grant administrator will often be the person kind of acting as the driving force behind preparing reports, especially budgetary ones. So we're looking for, many organizations would refer to them as like the awards manager, the awards specialist. Sometimes they would be in the Office of Sponsored Programs. It's whoever is supporting the PI in all of the parts of managing the project that are not the science, because the PI is the science expert, but often there is a person at the institution whose job it is to make sure that all the stuff that's not the science also happens.
Thanks so much, Marina. And with our approximately 5 minutes left, we have 2 more questions in the chat, and those are both from Jorge. So you still have permission to speak if you would like to ask your questions out loud. Technically speaking, permission to speak.
Yeah, so project funded overlap. You mentioned to have other sources of FFAR, for example, a fellowship of a student that has a FFAR fellowship, I understand goes there. But what about if you are using resources from other institutions in the same project that in a complementary way to the funding that you are requesting to FFAR? Should those go into the project funding overlap section?
I can answer that. Not typically. So the project funding overlap is really where we're looking for
Only FFAR
members.
sources.
Yeah, pretty much we're looking for any time that significant members of your team, you or one of your co-PIs, are already involved in
Perfect.
other applications. Like, for example, if you had a co-PI who was also applying to Seating Solutions and you were
Okay.
their co-PI,
Perfect. I understand.
yeah, we would want to know about that, Switchy.
Yeah.
Yep, and then I see the overhead question.
Yeah, the overhead question is we have a sub-awardee institution, and they don't charge overhead to their matching funds because it's the Kansas Weed Commission, and they don't charge them overhead. But then my institution will receive the money that is from them, both from matching fund and then do we charge overhead only on the FFR part they receive, or we charge overhead as a main institution also over their matching funds? Because we don't see that matching fund. The matching funds goes directly to them. So when we calculate the overhead, on which total we calculate the overhead as a main institution? On the
So-
part that they are provided by FFAR, or on the total with their match?
So our assumption is that every institution wants as much overhead as they are allowed to get. So the budget, as you are currently working with it, has the baseline assumption that it will calculate the overhead off of the total.
Okay.
If you want to set up your subaward so that it does not charge overhead, you will need to contact the grants team at grants@foundationfire.org, and we will change the budget template.
Can you write I see here, grants at foundations, the part of.
Absolutely. It's also when you are working on the online application, if you look in the top right corner, there should be a contact us button that
Okay.
will automatically open an email to us.
Thank you very much.
But essentially, we can sort of work that out on a case-by-case basis, but our assumption is that you will calculate overhead on everything. And that's mostly because managing a subaward takes time and money away from
Okay.
the primary institution. So we want you to have the resources to properly manage the subaward.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you, Marina. And I think we're going to close out with one more question. A quick one here. And that question is, fitting a budget justification for all organizations into 1,000 words is quite a feat. What hints do you have?
So again, the budget justification is more from a finance perspective table. The narrative is more the story of the budget and providing an opportunity to tell the reviewers or explain and justify the approach to the reviewers in a way that reinforces your understanding of the scale of the project and what it costs. So you don't have to provide a line-by-line detail of where the budget monies are going to. For example, you could say X amount of dollars will support a team of 10 who will explore different outreach strategies, just to touch base on an earlier example. And again, if you're really struggling with how to summarize your budget in a narrative, we invite you to contact us for further guidance.
Great. Thanks so much, Kathy. I'm going to formally wrap up the Q&A portion of it now. We've discussed over 30 really wonderful questions. And so thank you again, everyone, for your participation and interest. Thank you, Marina. Thank you, Kathy. And Kathy, I will pass it over to you for the closing of the session.
Yes. Thank you, Olivia, for an excellent job of leading the conversation. Thank you all for your wonderful engagement and again for your interest. And we are on standby to support you as we can. Very excited to receive your full proposals and looking forward to future conversations.
Great. Thanks so
Thanks.
much, everybody. Bye-bye.